Oh my gosh. All right. So thank you all for joining me again today. We have another amazing show with another amazing entrepreneur. And today's guest is Paul Kirch. He's a professional entrepreneur and has dedicated his career to helping others achieve success as business owners. As a professional marketer, salesperson, and sales leader turned business owner, he provides tools and training to create sustainable business models. His passion is inspiring others to pursue their dreams of entrepreneurship. So, Paul, I've given the leaders out there a quick snapshot, but in the next few minutes, in its purest form, how would you describe yourself and what you do?
First of all, I want to say that I'd tell you don't be coy with me, but you don't have a choice with that name, of course.
I don't have a choice with that, yes.
And I told you a few weeks ago I was going to be the first one to say don't be coy with me on your show, and here I pulled it off. I don't know what you owe me, but you owe me something.
You're right.
How did I describe myself? You know what? There was a nice bio you read there. I mean, you write these bios, and you send them to people, and then you hear somebody read it, and you're going, who is that? And it's like, it just doesn't seem real. I was a guy who spent 21 years in corporate America. I realized that I'm probably older than some of your listeners, or I've been doing in business longer than some of your listeners have been alive. But the truth be told is I spent 21 years in corporate America wanting to own a business. Now, entrepreneurship today, you and I discussed this, is kind of sexy, right? It's like being an entrepreneur. It's kind of cool to wear this hat.
Yeah.
At one point, it wasn't like that. There was a time when you didn't necessarily take that leap of faith. Corporate America protected you. You had a job. You stayed with that job. And that's what we were taught in school. It's like, okay, you work hard, go to school, do well in school, get out, get a job, and the company's going to take care of you. You can have this long career. Man, it's not like that today. And I spent 21 years with this amazing career wanting to own a company, but I thought, who am I to do this? I didn't grow up around entrepreneurial mentors. My dad was a school teacher. My mom stayed at home. We had a small family business in the summer, but it was the least entrepreneurial thing you could ever imagine. We ran a vegetable farm, and it was, I was out there planting 10,000 onion plants on hands and knees. Hated it to this day. I would rather pave something than see something green. Sorry, everyone out there that hates me for that. But, I have these scars from my childhood from that. But I knew that I wanted to own a business. And part of that was that, it's like I just always felt like I wanted to have control over my life. And as an employee, you don't always have that control. And the more money I made, the more responsibility I had, the more success I had, the less likely it ever seemed I was going to start a company. So when I did, it was really a big deal. And what motivated me to do it is I was working for a company I absolutely loved. My wife at the time was running operations. I was running sales. We were having a lot of success. This company was exploding. And one day the owner goes, great news, we're selling the company. I'm like, not great news. And it was a company that I actually thought at one point that I would maybe be able to buy. And he actually brought me on board for this very reason. There was a lot of things he'd promised that didn't come true. And when he sold the company, it was not a good situation. The firm that bought us was, I don't know if all French companies are notorious for having a micromanagement type of style, but this was a firm that was based overseas that bought us that had a very micro level of management. And we went from having autonomy and loving what we did to hating it overnight. I mean, my wife and I used to get excited to go in every day. And it got to the point where Sunday nights, she's in tears because we have to go in the next day. And it was this thing where I'm like, oh, one of us has to leave. And she had risen really high. She helped build that company. So she was, as an operations person, doing well. And I knew in sales I could go replace my job tomorrow. Yeah. So I left. I negotiated out of my contract. Funny thing is, Coy, my wife was 8 months pregnant when I left. I walked away from a very nice paycheck to no paycheck. And I'm taking job interviews, getting job offers. I'd been in the same industry for a long time. And I was getting job offers. People wanted to hire me, but I kept turning the jobs down. My wife's like, either take one of these jobs or go start this company you've talked about. So she put her size 6 foot in my backside and pushed me out the ledge. And I'm grateful she did, because I wasn't willing to put my family at risk. But when she said that, I'm like, you know what? I got to do it. Fortunately, I was in a position where I could afford to basically work without paying myself for a lengthy period of time. I was able to spend some time as my son was born, being around the family more. So it was a really blessing. But what I found with entrepreneurship was this whole world that opened up then and made me feel like, man, I have the ability to create and do things for myself. It was really empowering. Man, it's been like this. It's been a roller coaster ride. It's been fun. It's been tough. It's been the hardest job I've ever done, but it's so liberating.
So there has to be something or a series of events that really inspired you to start this business, that really inspired you to start the business that you currently have right now. I would love
Yeah.
for you to take us to that aha moment, right? Because I
Yeah.
think it's so important to really have our listeners and now, of course, our viewers to be able to look at all of these different experiences that they're going through and see them for possibly more that could maybe even be the seed to what they're looking for. So can you take us to that aha moment or those series of events that cause that aha moment?
I can, and some of the stuff I'm about to say is going to sound more glamorous than it is. I'm not telling you any of this because I'm like, oh, look at me. It's just the opposite. I essentially am involved in running 3 different companies, and that sounds impressive. What it really means is I'm pulled all over the place.
Yeah.
But my primary business, I was in sales and sales leadership at the time of leaving my company, and I thought, what's the easiest thing I can do to make a difference? And I was working in the marketing research industry. It's an industry that did not have a lot of structured sales processes, and I knew I could make a difference helping some of these smaller or mid-sized companies out there. And so I left to help do sales training, sales strategy work. We created a lead generation team, all great stuff. But I was a wantrepreneur for so long, and I call myself a wantrepreneur because I wanted to own a company, but I didn't have the courage to do it. I didn't have the resources, and so when I did, I'm like, you know what? I know what it's like to feel like that guy who spent 21 years wanting to own a company. So I focused very much on that for a long time, and I said, you know what? When I can do it, I want to make a difference and help people that feel that way. And then I know what it's like to be an entrepreneur to have success. I know what it's like to be an entrepreneur to struggle and be at a point where you're going, can I continue this? And then finding processes and ways to be able to move forward. And all that stuff is great. But what it did is it made me realize I want to help that person who feels that way. And so I had this vision in my head of Boss Academy Radio and Boss Academy. I'd done a podcast show, a video podcast show with a gentleman in Atlanta for almost 2 years where we focused on online marketing issues and we talked about digital marketing and offline sales. And it was kind of this really cool thing we were doing, but his business took him in a different direction. We stopped doing that show and I missed it. I was at a networking event hosted by web.com, and web.com, for people that don't know it, they have a tour for golfers that's kind of the precursor to the PGA, but they also do web hosting and all these other things. And they had a small business summit at one of the golf tournaments here in town, PGA event. And so I went to it and I almost didn't go. I was like, I don't want to go to another sales pitch. Well, there was no sales pitch. In fact, it was great. The speaker was with web.com. She talked about digital marketing strategies and all these great things. But the audience was a lot of retailers and small businesses right over their heads. And she was confusing them. And because she was talking about higher level stuff and they were at this point and she was up here. And so during Q&A, I said, do you mind if I add some clarification for a gentleman over here? And she goes, no, please do. She was really gracious. She was super sweet about it. And so I started answering some questions and I said, you know what? And here's some tools I use. And here's how I schedule my social media and like stuff you use, like Hootsuite, things like this. But these people didn't know anything about it. Afterwards, Coy, there was probably 50 people in that room. I'll bet over half of them were coming up handing me business cards, thanking me. Wow. And it was like, felt really good, right? But one of the people in the audience was the general manager of this radio station over in Dallas. And she goes, that was really great. Do you have a card? And I gave her a card. And I said, do you have a card? And she goes, I don't have any cards with me, which is normally the don't call us, we'll
Don't
call
call
you
me.
thing.
Yeah, exactly.
But she did say, she goes, look, she goes, maybe we can even have you on as a guest on one of our shows. I thought that would be great. Very flattering. Well, about a week later, she called me and she goes, hey, we thought about having you on as a guest, but we don't want to do that. And I thought, well, this is a weird call. And she goes, we want to offer you your own show. And she goes, would you consider that? And I went over and visited the studio, and I'd never done live radio in my life. And I told her about this vision I had for Boss Academy. And she says, well, let's do it. And I was able to acquire the domain bossacademy.com, and I created the show Boss Academy Radio, did it live for quite some time before moving it to a podcast. And I tell that long story because I was a guy who knew what it felt like to be that entrepreneur. And I know what it's like to be an entrepreneur that's struggling and also to have success. And so Boss Academy is really here to support those people that are kind of on their journey, trying to find their way.
Yeah. I mean, for everyone that's out there, what would you do for free? Notice in Paul's story, he was at an event, and during this event, he decided to take it upon himself to get up and begin to offer some clarification, to just simply offer additional insights and additional tactics that he was using. This was something that it's not like he was going to get paid for. This was something where he wasn't even sure if, the host of the event or the speaker at that time was even going to share the mic or even give him a platform to be able to give those particular things. But look at what he gave for free and how it now quickly turned into a business. A lot of times we've got so many passions that we have, and we're wondering, well, what can I do with this? What are those things that you would do for free? What are those things that you're excited to give, that you would be happy to raise your hand and stand up and speak about those particular things or those particular topics? Those are things that they matter to you. And these are things that you want to give to humanity, to, of course, move the community forward. So think about those things that are important to you and things that you would do for free, and see if there is a way to, one, find out if there is a market for it, and two, find out if that market will pay a reasonable price so that you can create a sustainable business around that. So, Paul, you had, thank you for sharing that story, because that really was such an amazing story. And I want individuals, again, to continue to look at the experiences that they're going through and see all of the different seeds of success and how success leaves clues. And we've now spoken about Boss Radio in the podcast so many times. I want us to touch in on that. So can you give us a little background on the show, and also let us know what boss means? I know that it's got more than one meaning other than just, of course, being a boss.
Absolutely. Can I step back and talk about what you were talking about giving just a minute ago?
Yeah.
All right. So, we all hear it. It's like, you want money, give money. You want love, give love. But I worked for Gallup, the Gallup organization, for 10 years, a great company. I was in operations. Never was really exposed to the marketing research industry. I didn't know there was an industry outside of our company. It was kind of, we jokingly say it was a cultish atmosphere, but it really was. We were kind of sheltered from everything else, and we loved what we did. When I left there and went into sales, I discovered this whole industry. And the company that hired me in my first sales job, the day I was on board, they said, you know what? We want you to go to a networking event. I'd never been to a networking event in my life. And I went to the networking event, and I was talking to one of the women that was on the board of directors, which at the time seemed like this, oh my gosh, she's on the board of directors. What a big deal. I told her I wanted to volunteer. They had me help at one of the events. Next thing I know, I'm meeting all these people, and they said, hey, we're needing some people for our board. Would you consider joining the board? And I thought, yeah, of course, I'd love to. I joined the board as a volunteer and became a board of director member, a director at large. I rose up to be president of that chapter. I've been president of a couple other chapters, a couple other organizations. Having trouble talking.
Yeah.
And I say this because volunteering and giving back, I didn't get paid for that stuff, but I'll tell you what I've gotten paid. I've gotten paid referrals, connections, respect. I'm held in a high regard, and have I always earned it? I mean, I like to think I have, but I was a guy who didn't have a lot of experience, but people thought I had experience because I was on this board. And, today I look back at The greatest gift you can give yourself is going out and getting involved in an organization, networking events, starting to press the flesh, starting to meet people. You will transform your life. I started writing articles. I started being a speaker at events, and I'm labeled as an expert by people that don't even know me. And it's a nice thing to have.
Yeah.
But what it translates into is me giving and getting a lot. So I hope that helps, because that's something I recommend to anybody young out there. Don't ignore networking events. You may go and go, I don't want to go drink with a bunch of people I don't know. You know what? If that's what your mission is, you're probably doing the wrong thing for yourself. Go there for the whole goal of meeting people and making connections. It's amazing. Okay, so Boss Academy Radio, it's really stems around the idea of making a difference and providing real business ownership success strategies. That's what BOSS stands for. Every show we do, I want to make sure people walk away with something they can apply. I had a compliment the other day from somebody. It was also an insult at the same time. He told me, he goes, I love your show. He goes, but the problem with it, he goes, I walk away with too many things to implement. And I thought, well, what a nice problem to have. So what I told him is, I said, that's an interesting issue, because we're exactly filling the mission that we want to. We're doing everything we said we would do, but maybe sometimes we're giving too much. We're overwhelming people. So one of the things I tell people out there is, if you're going through a program, learning a bunch of stuff, you've got a coach, or you're listening to Koi's show and you want to implement some of these things, you can't implement everything, because what happens is you get pulled like a rubber band, you get stretched, and eventually you're going to snap. Focus on prioritizing those things you take away. It's like, okay, I've got 10 things on this list. I'm going to prioritize them in number order. Number 1, I'm going to implement that, and I'm going to focus on that and nothing else until I get number 1 implemented. And then you find that it's like you've taken all this overwhelm and you've consolidated and put some structure around it. So hopefully that's something you can take away and leverage. But Boss Academy, the whole idea was just really to give people a place where that they had support, and when they're facing tough times, they don't have to go it alone. In fact, one of our other taglines is, let us be the last boss you'll ever need, because I really do believe that entrepreneurs can save the economy, but also save the world and make a huge impact. But they sometimes, as an entrepreneur, it's the loneliest job out there. I mean, some people argue that, but it's so true, because you think about it, Koi, as an entrepreneur, you face challenges that an average employee can never relate to. They're not the ones staying up at night trying to figure out how to make ends meet. They're not the ones working the weekends when their kids are in sporting events, making all these sacrifices. And sometimes we do feel like it's a lonely job. We can't confide in a wage earner and go, okay, well, here's what I'm facing, because they're going to go, dude, give yourself a break. You need to go on vacation. It's like, you got to go out. It's like, no, I've got sacrifices got to make. So you need support. So Boss Academy, that's why we want to say we're the last boss you'll ever need, because we really do want to be there for you in those tough times.
Yeah. So to quickly touch on all of the value bombs that you just dropped as well. So one was really focusing in on one thing. And I love an acronym that I've heard for the word focus, and it's simply follow one course until success, right? Don't try to implement way too many things, because you're right. You quickly move into overwhelm. And once you move into overwhelm, you find that stress levels are high, anxiety levels are high, pressure is high. And then you find that it is an issue for you to be able to truly implement what you wanted to implement and or find success in that, because you're being pulled in so many different directions. Another thing is continue to create. One of the biggest differences between being an employee and being an entrepreneur is, as an employee, you are constantly in the realm of earning. You're earning a paycheck, you're earning vacation time. But once you move into being an entrepreneur, you're no longer earning those things. You're now creating them. You're creating a paycheck. You're creating vacation time. You are creating opportunities. So it's now moving from a mindset from earning to creating. And I'd really love to ask you a very direct question here, Paul, because being a entrepreneur for 21 years, I know a ton of millennials who are entrepreneurs, right? Or they want to start a side business, or they have a passion project that they want to work on. What would be the one thing that you would tell them to give them that nudge or that inspiration to finally jump into doing what they've always wanted to do?
If it's something you really are passionate about and you really want to do, I will tell you, I'm not going to lie and sugarcoat it and say it's the easiest thing you're ever going to do. It's going to be this like dream situation. It's going to be tough, but get clarity. Focus on getting clear on not just what you want to do, but more importantly, why you want to do it. If you say, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur so I can travel the world and have flexibility, work from anywhere, I can have any car I want. That's great stuff. What are you going to do when you're stressed beyond belief and stretched thin? You're going to say, that's not really a big enough motivator to go through this hell that I'm going through. So you want to give yourself a big enough why and get that why and really find passion behind it. Don't just have a why that's like, yeah, I want to help entrepreneurs because I know what it's like to be in their shoes. I focus on that pain that I felt. I focus on that stress. I mean, there was a time where I was so stressed out about my business, trying to figure out how do I scale this. I was trading time for money. I had business coming in the door, but I couldn't scale it. And I'm sitting in front of my whiteboard trying to plan. And I couldn't even pick up the pen, Coy. I'm sitting there going, reach down and grab that pen. And I might get the pen in my hand, but I couldn't write on the board because I was like, it's just all these ideas and I was pulling all over the place. And what I needed to do in that moment was to step back and get my composure and go back and figure out why. And so I start my day now with a planning session where I'll draw lines on my whiteboard, and the first column is why, what, when, and I'll focus on writing my what, but then I'll go back to column one, the priority, and put my why. And if that why isn't big enough to motivate me, it's probably not going to be something that I'm going to stick with. And so I would say that that's one of the greatest lessons that I've kind of uncovered. And, you hear, oh, you got to have a why, you got to have a why. Well, you really do need a why.
Yeah, no, I love that. Creating that why creates a clear path for you. A lot of times we think that, entrepreneurship is all about really traveling that road that's never been traveled or, what I mean, kind of going through the muddy side of the road as opposed to the path that someone has already laid. The thing about that is once you come up with your why, now you have an opportunity to create a clear path, an opportunity to be able to see the trees through the forest. And that's really what it's about, because entrepreneurship can be extremely difficult, especially if you don't have that clear vision, you don't have that why, and then you find yourself chasing all of these different objects. Another great thing that I want to pick on, Paul, is you were talking about your pain and it was using that pain. And for the individuals that are out there listening, leaders, audience, I would like for you to answer this question. And it is, how are you using your pain, right? Are you ignoring it, or are you using it to push you towards your breakthrough, right? Think about that pain that you have and how you're using it. So you mentioned stepping back a bit ago, Paul, and I don't want to just step back. I want to go back. And I want us to go back in time together, okay?
I'm a little scared, but let's do it.
So as we are now in this time machine and we've now gone back in time, what is one piece of advice that you would give to a younger you?
Not to tell too much about my story. Well, there's two things, if I can do two things.
Sure.
When I was in first grade, I'm revealing way too much here because I'm going to sound like a slacker. I was in first grade. I was a smart kid. I was way ahead of most of the other kids in the class in terms of intelligence. And I was a really good speller. I was studying for the spelling contest, but we had a reading workbook that we had to do every day. And the teacher never checked it. She's like, pull out your reading workbook. We do the workbook, put it back in our desk, never checked it. Well, I never did mine. And parent-teacher conferences come around, and my parents come home and they said, well, your teacher told us that you weren't doing your workbook, but she said it's not a big deal because you were studying really hard for your spelling contest. And I was like, this little light bulb goes off. I can get away with a lot of stuff. And, I didn't consciously think that as a 6-year-old, but you know what it taught me is that throughout my life, there are times where I've cut corners that I shouldn't have. And there's times where I didn't follow through on certain things that I should have. And I tell you what, I would go back and tell that kid, you know what, you need some accountability. You need to go back and fill out this entire workbook. That would have been the greatest lesson any teacher could have given me. Another one, I didn't learn to swim until I was an adult. And I was a kid taking swim lessons, and I was floating on my back. The swim teacher's holding me. I can remember this as clear as a bell. And she said, she goes, well, I'm going to let go now. And I panicked. I started screaming and freaking out. She let me out of the pool. My mom took me home, told me I never had to go back. I would have forced myself to go back because I learned these lessons. You don't realize what you're doing to your children when you let them make decisions that are going to have long-term effect. So and there's some other things that I would have taught myself. I would have taught myself forgiveness. I had a friend who killed himself in high school, and I felt so guilty about it because I knew that he was contemplating it and I didn't do anything about it. And some other people that had that same conversation with him, I held on to that for 30 years until I finally had gone to a Tony Robbins event, and Tony had taken us through this exercise of forgiveness. And it's amazing how overnight like that, I walked away no longer holding on to that, but I would have allowed myself forgiveness. So anyway, there's several lessons I could go back and say in moments in time, things I would have done differently. Those are the ones.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like the story that you told about not learning how to swim until you were an adult. And the reason why that story really resonates with me is because I have a daughter, and I think about all of the times that she wants to quit after she's failed something, or, here we are and we're working on numbers, or we're working on addition or subtraction, or we're learning the planets, right? And it's in the moment that she thinks she can't get it is the moment that she says, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it anymore, Dad. I don't want to play this game. I no longer want to fly this kite. I don't want to learn how to ride a bike. I don't want to do it anymore. And I think that a lot of times, even as adults, we look at the word fail with a very negative connotation.
Yeah.
And if we were to look at that 4-letter F word, right? FAIL, and be able to change our perception about it, I think that it would be easier for us to understand that failure is the prerequisite for success. And if we look at that word fail, FAIL, and we put this acronym to it, first attempt in learning, and we understand and we realize that we are no longer giving ourselves permission to fail, but we are more so giving ourselves permission to learn. Because the more and more you fail, so to speak, the more and more you learn. And once you are learning from those experiences, you're doing nothing but getting better and improving yourself.
Well, if I can add to those first two lessons I mentioned, learning that I could get away with things. I mean, throughout school, I never opened a book. I never had to. It was like school was easy for me. And then I got to college, and all of a sudden I had this rude awakening. I'm like, wait a minute, this is on a whole different level. And I struggled in college because of that. But the lessons I learned from that, you asked me what I would go back and tell myself. But if I really think about it, I was giving myself a gift, because the things I've had to do to overcome those challenges, amazing. When I learned to swim, I'm living in Seattle, Washington as a 30-year-old adult male. I was thinking I might have been 31. And I went to the YMCA to take swim lessons because you know what? I grew up near a lake, and all my friends would go out swimming and boating. I was afraid to go in the water.
Yeah.
And I, as an adult, said, you know what? I'm going to overcome this. And when I took those swim lessons as an adult, It's a little embarrassing to be a 31-year-old adult taking lessons, but I'm in this pool with other people that are the same way I am. I'm like hey, I'm not alone. But when I went through that and learned to swim, I came out on the other side, this person who grew like that, because I realized that it was a story I told myself for 31 years that was bullshit. Excuse my French. Can I say that on your show?
Yeah,
I just, you
yeah.
can
I
cut it out
mean,
if you need to,
yeah.
but you know, but it was a story. And that's the problem, Coy, is we tell ourselves stories and the stories become real. I interviewed Marissa Peer on my show, and she had done this TED talk, and Marissa Peer did this great exercise. And I hope you don't mind me sharing this.
Oh,
I talk
please.
about it a lot, but she said, close your eyes and imagine you're holding a lemon in your hand. So I want you to do that. Just close your eyes real quick. And I want you to act like you're pulling this lemon up to your nose. Can you smell that lemon? If you have your eyes closed and you're doing this, you can. And then she says, okay, now I want you to take a big bite of that lemon. And we all know what's going to happen. You take a bite of that lemon, our mouth's going to pucker, it's going to water. This lemon doesn't exist, right? It's imaginary, but we made it real. And that's the greatest lesson I can give somebody today is if you really want something, visualize it, because your mind doesn't know what's real and what's not. You know what your mind knows? It knows that it likes pleasure and it wants to avoid pain. And when you say, well, I procrastinating makes me feel horrible. You know what? It may, but in the moment, procrastination feels pretty good because you got out of doing what you wanted to do.
Yeah.
And when you recognize that your mind wants pleasure and avoids pain, you can take those things that were once painful, make them pleasurable. I have a pool now. I swim with my kids all the time.
Nice.
And it's comical. I think about, man, I spent 31 years telling myself this stupid story. It's pointless, but they are stories that we tell, and you have the ability to turn every bit of that around. And as an entrepreneur, you're going to need some of those tools.
You're definitely going to need some of those tools, and it has a lot to do with this. Build on your imagination, not your history. So many times we feel like we have to just build upon our history, and we find ourselves seeing that sometimes our history isn't really that great. And then we get locked in to feeling as though that's all we'll ever be. Begin to build on your imagination. Start to imagine again. Everything that is now was once in someone's mind. It was once just a thought. It was once someone using their imagination and saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to do that. And they built upon that imagination, as opposed to listening to everyone else who said that it was impossible and that it couldn't be done, and building upon their history. So build on your imagination, not your history. So Paul, while we are still in the time machine, I would like for you to answer this very quick question, because now we're in the time machine. And as you see, you still have all of your mental capacities of
That's
being an
debatable.
amazing entrepreneur, but you've lost everything. You've lost all of your contacts, you've lost your business, and you have $100 in your pocket. How would you rebuild your business?
I would probably spend that $100 going to a networking event and starting to build some connections and open doors. Now, I'm a sales guy, so it's easy for me to say that, but I wasn't. I wasn't at one point. I was a shy kid who was pretty insecure. I got to college, and I remember my freshman year in college telling myself, you're no longer going to be shy. I'm sitting in the dorm, moving in, didn't know anybody, and I all of a sudden became this outgoing person. People tell me that people don't change. I changed because I chose to change. So I would go to a networking event and I would connect with people that I thought I could help, and I would pursue them until I got their business.
Amazing, amazing. Leaders, you do not have to be sick to get better, but you do have to be willing to change. So, Paul, I know we are getting very, very short on time, but I do want to get to at least one of our
You have
audience
a time machine, Coy. I mean, I don't see why this is an issue. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So we are going to quickly jump into the audience round. I've got a couple of questions here from the leaders audience. In the audience round, it's quickly going to put you on the hot seat. Just going to be 1 to 2 quick tips on the questions that are being asked. You ready?
Yeah.
All right. What are the top 2 tips to create a sustainable business?
Well, I mentioned one. clarity, getting clear, focusing on your why. And then I would tell you the other thing is, do not go at this alone. Get a coach, get somebody who can help you on this journey. Selfishly plugging Boss Academy Radio, come out to bossacademy.com and get support that way. But you don't want to go it alone. And there's several reasons, because paving the path that has already been paved by other people is a lot of work. Why not follow in the shoes of somebody who's already been successful and somebody knows what they're doing? You don't have to go it alone.
You don't have to go it alone. Think about Paul's swimming story. Imagine if Paul tried to teach himself to swim, right? Anything new that you're doing, you might as well find out if someone else is doing it and has done it and is successful at it.
Am I wearing a Speedo in that vision? That's what I want to know. A thong, one of those banana hammock things. So
there we go. Well, hey, I'm not going to tell anyone how to think about you swimming. So if that's how they choose to think about it, Paul,
I'm thinking some of them are envisioning their foot on my head as I'm underwater. But anyway, go ahead.
Second and final question, so that we can wrap up, the top tip to get increased engagement on Facebook.
Oh, wow. Top tip to get increased engagement on Facebook. Well, Facebook's a tough platform if you're talking about business page and fan pages. So I'm going to answer this in a little bit roundabout way. Facebook changes the rules constantly. Now, if you have a fan page or a business page, you better plan on putting some money in advertising if you want exposure. But as far as like engagement on your actual page, just focus on providing content that you think would help the person who's your ideal avatar. You know, if that's you are your own perfect avatar, what are things that would attract you and help you? And focus on giving. Don't focus on getting. Sales today is all about engagement and building trust, providing real valuable services. If your approach is selfish, they have a lot of choices. They can go somewhere else. Be selfless in everything you do.
Perfect. So, Paul, before we get into our last question, I would like to give you an opportunity to share with the leaders out there what you're passionate about right now and how they can get in contact with you.
I mean, I really am passionate about helping the entrepreneur sustain and grow their businesses and do it in a way that they don't feel like they're on this journey by themselves. Come out to bossacademy.com, subscribe. If you want to contact me directly, I mean, you look for Paul Kirch, you're going to find me. But if you come out to Facebook, we've got Boss Academy Radio, Facebook /Boss Academy Radio, or you can just email me directly at info@bossacademy.com. And I respond to every inquiry I get. So look forward to hearing from you.
So, Paul, before I let you go, what is one piece of parting advice that you would share with the leaders of tomorrow out there?
Man, leaders of tomorrow. Well, you know, I'm mentoring a college student right now, and I try and do some mentoring. And one of the things that I'm always talking to him about is don't undervalue your experience. Now, he goes through this great program. He's a marketing student, but he goes through this great program where they do hands-on practical experience training and projects that are as much real in the real world as anybody out there doing a job. If you're gaining some experience that is something that's practical and applicable, don't be afraid to showcase that as something that you can do. Don't hide from your ability to impress someone else, because I tell you what, if you just think you're going to put a resume together that's going to talk about your job at Wendy's and it's going to talk about the fact you've got a degree and you're going to get all these job offers, it's not going to happen. So showcase any experience that you've gained and don't be afraid to explain why. And I think that's a big part of it, Coy, is don't just talk about the fact that you've done this, but why is it relevant? Because if I'm the person hiring you and you did a project that was a marketing project that forced you to go through all these steps to create a market plan and develop a product from ground up, and all you do is say, oh, I was part of this project. No, explain to me why I care. Why is somebody coming out of college that has no experience on paper somebody that I should hire? Because that is something that I know that I bring them on board day one, they can make an impact.
There you go. So, leaders, head on over to leadersinspireleaders.com for the show notes and Paul's contact information. Remember, the highest form of leadership is inspiring other leaders. So, be inspiring and stay inspired. Paul, thank you so much for joining me and inspiring the leaders of tomorrow.
Don't be coy with me. No, in all seriousness, Coy, love you, man. I appreciate you having me on, and appreciate the fact that you're doing such a big thing out there to help the millennials and those people that are trying to find their path. It's an important job.